This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome to Cornell Cinema. I'm Mary Fessenden, the director, and it's really thrilling to see this theater so full. It's great. The first thing I would like to do is thank the people who have made tonight's event and the related Todd Haynes retrospective and Bob Dylan series possible. They are David and Pat Atkinson. The Atkinsons are the donors who make possible the Atkinson Forum in American Studies at Cornell, a program that seeks to bring to campus the best that America has to offer in the arts. And the American arts don't get much better than the visionary films of Todd Haynes, the insightful film writing of J. Hoberman, and the legendary music of Bob Dylan. So please join me in thanking the Atkinsons. Yeah, stand up. I'd also like to thank Nick Salvatore and Glenn Altschuler from American Studies and the fabulous Cornell Cinema staff for all of their assistance with this event. Finally, our very special guest, Todd Haynes, J. Hoberman, and Bob Dylan. No, just kidding. Bob couldn't make it. Before introducing Jim Hoberman, I'd like to explain how the evening will work. We'll be doing a screening of I'm Not There, as you know, and then after that we'll be taking a short 5 to 10 minute break that will give you some time to stretch your legs, use the restrooms, while we prepare the stage for a conversation between Jim and Todd, which will actually be videotaped by Cornell Cast, and that will be available for viewing on the web, I think, sometime quite soon. And so any friends who weren't able to get in, you should tell them that they can actually go to the web and view the entire conversation on Cornell Cast. So now, on to Jim Hoberman. Jim celebrated his 30th anniversary working as a film critic for the Village Voice this past fall, having published his first review in the paper on October 24th, 1977, a review of David Lynch's Eraserhead, which, by the way, had its 10th engagement at Cornell Cinema just last month. Before joining The Voice, he studied English literature at the State University of New York in Binghamton and filmmaking at Columbia University. He made experimental films for a while, one of which was actually included in the New York Film Festival. He became a Voice staff writer in 1983 and the senior film critic in 1988. In addition to his film criticism, he has written 9 books, including The Definitive History of Yiddish Language Cinema and The Dream Life, Movies, Media, and the Mythology of the 60s. He has curated film series at the Museum of Modern Art and the American Museum of the Moving Image in New York and the Pacific Film Archives in Berkeley, and he's a current member of the New York Film Festival Selection Committee. He is affiliated with New York University and Cooper Union, and he lectures at universities around the country. Over the years, he's been honored with several awards, including the Alternative Press Association's Award for Best Film Critic and a New York Book Critics Award nomination and a Guggenheim Fellowship. The Brooklyn Academy of Music Cinematheque is currently honoring Jim and his 30th anniversary with a film series that he curated, and their write-up sums up Jim nicely. J. Hoberman is one of the greatest film critics to emerge from his generation. His writing is adventurous, erudite, and provocative, while simultaneously expressing a boundless pleasure in the art of cinema. We are thrilled to have him here. Please join me in welcoming J. Hoberman.
Thanks. Thank you. 30 years. I was a teenager when I started. Emotionally, in any case. As a journalist, I think the best thing for any journalist really is to get a scoop. And I had this privilege 20 years ago when I heard about a little Super 8 movie that was showing in some obscure venue in the East Village in New York. And I went to see it, and it turned out to be this brilliant treatment of Karen Carpenter as enacted by a cast of Barbie dolls. Of course, it was Superstar, Todd Haynes' second film, but the first film of his to be shown. And it was a tremendously exciting for me to be able to write about this film, which I knew nothing about and hadn't read anything about, and then just to stumble across it and write about it. And maybe the third best thing that can happen to a journalist is to be interviewed by the national media in regard to some other thing that you wrote about that has somehow become a political football for the various right-wing groups. And I got that privilege also thanks to Todd Haynes when I wrote about his third movie, Poison, which had been funded by the NEH, or the National Endowment for the Arts or Humanities, and because it dealt with some presumably taboo material dealing with illness and sex in America, it had become, and was funded partially by the government, became an issue. So I got to hold forth on that on NPR or whatever. Since that time, Todd has made several other films. His film Safe, which came out several years later, was voted by a critics poll organized by the Voice at the turn of the century as the single best movie of the 1990s. After that, he made Velvet Goldmine, probably the most cerebral rock movie ever made, and another sort of cause célèbre. After that, Far From Heaven, a film that many people thought was the best movie of its year, 2002, I think. A fascinating meditation on the 1950s as refracted through the films of Douglas Sirk. And last year, I think that Todd made his culminating film to date, and you might have heard something about this film. It has something to do with Bob Dylan. In any case, I think that it was really, last year was a terrific year for movies. There was a great David Cronenberg film, and there was There Will Be Blood. There was a movie called Southland Tales that a lot of people didn't like, but I thought was very good. But I think that I'm Not There was really my favorite of all of these, and I would like to present to you the filmmaker, Todd Haynes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. It's so nice to be back in Ithaca on this gorgeous, beautiful day we all had today. And it's such a privilege to be here and show my retrospective of films and to have Jim here to say all those things. So nice. I'm not going to talk at length now, so we have time later to talk, but I want to thank Mary Fessenden for arranging all of this and inviting me back again to this beautiful campus. And of course to David and Pat Atkinson for making all of this possible and for reciprocating artistic freedom, particularly tonight, by making art free, which is pretty cool. So, and all the amazing things that they do. This film was definitely a life-altering experience and privilege to be able to treat this extraordinary subject and his body of work to the screen, you know, and be given that freedom and that privilege to explore his life as a filmmaker. And so there's a lot to talk about and a lot of movie to watch. So I hope you guys enjoy the film. I'll be here afterwards with Jim and we can discuss it. And I hope you have a really good time. Thanks so much.
Are we mic'd okay? I guess so.
Hello?
I have to say, this is the third time that I've seen the movie, and I wasn't even sure I was going to stay
Yeah.
for it, and I just started watching it, and I got completely absorbed. Very different than the other two screenings, and I noticed a number of things I hadn't seen before, and was once again impressed by just the wealth of detail, how rich this movie is. I was struck this time by how precisely you got the feel of these early 70s Westerns, with this kind of magic hour lighting and so on, but sense of muddy streets and everything. But so you've been working on this movie a long time, and how does it feel? Did you get to do what you wanted?
I did. I really did. It's which is saying a lot, I guess, because I really had a very high standard to apply myself to and to sort of rise to, and when I really think about it, it was a very difficult film to make, practically, logistically, financially, but creatively it really was an extraordinary experience when I think back on it. And I think back on the relationship that we developed with Jeff Rosen, Dylan's manager, because people may have heard or not, but the whole thing started with the concept of the multiple characters and definitely a structure that would be interwoven. And that's really all I had when I first approached Dylan in 2000 via Jeff Rosen and Jesse Dylan, Dylan's oldest son, who's also a filmmaker. And they just suggested I write it out in a one-sheet description, and we send it to Dylan. And although both of them were intrigued by the idea, neither of them could vouch for him or presume what he would say. He'd only rejected proposals for more conventional biopics in the past. And he was, as they continued to tell me, inscrutable in every possible way, and that their opinion mattered little. And so he basically signed off on the concept, and that was the beginning and end of my relationship with Dylan himself. And the entire process that followed, which was interrupted when I did my film Far From Heaven and came back to it full on in 2003, probably to begin official research and writing and all that, was really through Jeff Rosen, and he's the gatekeeper. He's Dylan's manager of the past 30 years, and he's an amazing guy, and he really he gave me an incredible amount of freedom to interpret this life and this person, and access to anything I needed in terms of music and some connections to some people and so forth. But I remember a situation where we needed to extend the rights to the project because the writing was taking some time, and I called up Jeff and I had to talk to him, and I was just like, Jeff, I feel like this awesome responsibility. I'm doing the Dylan movie, and I want it to really convey Dylan to the world in a way that I felt was really honest and truthful and as fair as I could do, and that was hard. And he said, "Oh, Todd, you don't have to worry about that shit. This is your own weird, unique perspective on Dylan, and that's all you have to worry about." And I just thought, when do you have those conditions,
I had heard that there were two managers, one whose job it was to say no and one whose job it was to say yes. Is that?
And they were both played by Jeff, but by different actors, right?
So you're saying that the concept started with the multiple actors. Why only 6 characters?
Yeah, exactly. They're actually, I always conceived of it as a sort of the number 7, which recurs in Dylan's songs, which had a kind of, look to the Shakespeare's 7 cycles of man. It felt like a comfortable number. And in my mind, it is 7 characters, Christian Bale occupying two of them, playing two very different aspects of Dylan in his two characters, but bound in the same story in that one documentary. But yeah, of course, one could go on, and I've been asked many times, where and why did you stop? Or how did you determine to kind of end it? And everybody often has their own way of defining where I stopped. Why did you stop in 74? Why did you stop in, they have a specific way of reading the Richard Gere story or reading the Christian period as the end bracket of a very long and ongoing creative life. And I guess I just sort of felt a kind of, that these were my distillations of Dylan, and that they all sort of had their roots in the 60s or the 60s era. And that made sense to me. I felt comfortable with that. As I need with a subject as broad and dense and with so much of his own work to go through and try to understand or familiarize myself with. I felt like I needed limits. I needed some formal and creative and rational limits of how to contain it. And for me, the 60s era made the most sense. And I found that most of these selves or identities had their roots in the 60s era and were recycled perhaps, arguably, later into the 80s and 90s in Dylan's work, but that you could find traces of where they came from in that period.
Where'd you find Marcus Carl Franklin, and did you know you were looking for him before you found him?
That's a good way of putting it, because I think I underestimated. He plays Woody. He plays Woody. Yeah, I mean, in so many cases with this film, it wasn't until we actually did find Marcus, or I had the experience of witnessing Kate's performance in front of me, that it's only after the fact that you kind of go, what was I ever, the fact that we had found it brought up the shock of how I could ever have expected to, that these were really difficult things to ask actors to pull off, particularly a young child actor. And it wasn't, but I think all directors blindly proceed. They just go forward or you die. You turn to salt the second you look back at the risks you're taking. And this film certainly pushed that to a certain limit. But yeah, we just kept looking, and Laura Rosenthal found this kid in New York, the New York area, who'd been initially seen in the Charles Wolfe production of Lackawanna Blues that was an HBO production that he played opposite what? Yes, Murkison, yes. And he was amazing, but he was pretty much a witness to a series of amazing cameo performances in this film, and so you really didn't see what he was capable of, and he read for us and was incredible.
And then you saw Kate Blanchett as Katharine Hepburn, and you realized that she was to play Bob Dylan.
Exactly, that eureka moment. It really was more when I saw her. I knew she could physically do it, but I think I was convinced when I saw her on stage in Hedda Gabler, Brooklyn. There was something about seeing her scale on stage, and she was dressed in a Victorian costume that was very tight bodice, and she'd lost some weight for it, I think, or was already, sizing down for her return to Elizabeth and this film. And the scale of her head to her body and one quick turn, like severe look across the stage, was so riveting. And I just sort of sawed an image of Bob Dylan from the 66 period, superimposed. Don't you guys also?
Well, it's interesting because now that you mentioned it, in that production, it really is her dominating the scene in the same way. I mean, everything sort of revolved around her, and that. I mean, even to the degree that she's on for the last, for the shooting, which usually happens off screen, off stage. Yeah. Has this movie entered into Dylan mythology, or Dylanology. I mean, have people, spotted him, like masked and anonymous, going into screenings, or is there a theory that he's actually in the movie somewhere?
I've heard all of that stuff, basically. And what's very funny is when I was doing the DVD commentary recently for the release of the DVD, and I wanted to just double check. I couldn't remember after so many years where some things came from, some lines, some quotes in the film. And I remember Googling them, and usually, so I could get the source really quickly, and I could just have it on the paper while I was reading my notes for all the Dylanologists out there. And, I would be looking, like 7 Simple Rules for Life in Hiding. I couldn't find where the original, it took me a little while to find it. It's from the 11 epitaphs that he included when he was writing notes for Joan Baez in 64, I believe. But I was first looking for it, and I kept getting, I'm not there, Kate Blanchett, Carl Marcus Franklin, and you're just like in this hall of mirrors, you can't escape.
I was struck also by your connoisseurship in your choice of what Dylan songs you use, and also which performances of his you use, because there are a lot of things which are for many people, if you're not really hardcore, would have been pretty obscure. I'm not even sure that the title song was available in any form.
No, it wasn't. It's been long bootlegged, the song I'm Not There, which came from Dylan's bootleg basement tape recording, from 1967, that he did it with the band famously in the couple different basements in Woodstock. And but for people who wanted to get that stuff, they could get it. I got it from friends, and you get the full 5 CDs worth of recordings that happened in those sessions, and it's a completely different experience from the officially released.
This was a bootleg of the bootleg.
It was
yeah,
exactly. But in a way, what's so interesting about Dylan is that those recordings and the Royal Albert Hall that was called the Royal Albert Hall recording, but was the '66 live concert that was actually recorded in Manchester and misnamed, was the beginning of bootleg recordings. They started the bootleg tradition as soon as Bob Dylan had this many recordings that were not going to be released to the public. It surged this intense desire for people to get their hands on them. And so the whole process, the whole history of bootlegging began around those discs with I think the Great White Wonder.
The Great White Wonder, yes.
Was a collection of both,
yeah.
selects from basement tapes and that show.
Very nice. You could buy them, in head shops.
Yeah.
It was
all in one-stop shopping.
Yeah, that's right. With a sort of translucent red vinyl.
Right. I remember going to record. It was a little later, I guess, in the '80s, but I'd go to record swap, meets in Hollywood, and you'd find amazing stuff.
So, were there any Dylan songs that you felt that you couldn't use, that personally, because there was too much emotion in the song?
There were some that I loved that I couldn't find a place for. There were many personal favorites, Love Minus Zero, No Limit, songs like that always moved me, that I just didn't really find a place for. But I really felt I couldn't really use Like a Rolling Stone in the body of the film. I wanted to save it for the end of the film, but I really didn't feel like dramatizing that particular song or making it part of the narrative sort of work of the film.
Was I'm Not There always the title?
It was pretty much always the title. I flirted with 7 Curses, which is another bootleg recording that came out later on the Columbia bootleg, first 3-disc bootleg series. It's a beautiful song, and it was this idea of 7 characters that I was working with. And then was there another working title I had? I can't remember. 7 Curses, Alias, before that show came out. That's how long I've been working on this thing, because it was the name Dylan assumed in the Pat Garrett Billy the Kid Peck and Pop film that he appears in as Alias. But everyone loved I'm Not There. Christine loved it so much, and I kept kind of going back to it. But it was the very first, it was the way I titled the proposal that I sent Dylan. Oh. I'm Not There, suppositions on a film concerning Dylan. And when we began our relationship with Paramount, which developed the script and then passed on it when I was done, that title got out. And it's funny how you can't ever retrieve a misnomer like once it's out in the world. And so for years, literally, everyone referred to this film as I'm Not There, suppositions on a film concerning Dylan, which I chose as the most sophomoric, like a purposefully obscure thing to send to him, to make him sure that it wouldn't be some commercial sellout movie, which I guess I succeeded in not making.
And so far as you know, he still hasn't, he's never seen it or commented on it?
Officially, no. I've heard mounting rumors and...
Oh, what have you heard?
I can't even say. But it's good.
It's good. It's all good.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It should be. I mean, I would say that this is really the movie that he wanted to make in some respects and could not make. I mean, I should ask you as a filmmaker, what do you think of what's your opinion of Eat the Document and Ronaldo and Clara?
I love Eat the Document. I think that is that's a film that Dylan is sort of titled as one of the directors of and editors of that never was released. And it was the footage that you saw, a lot of the footage was remastered for Scorsese's documentary, No Direction Home, that shows Dylan in '66 and that great color footage of him performing with the band that year. And it was the year after all the beautiful black and white footage that became Don't Look Back. But this was a film that Dylan, it was actually after his motorcycle accident, he settled in Woodstock and he started editing this movie. And I think he had various influences and people helping him out here and there. But what resulted was this highly experimental, strange, elliptical documentary that basically was a sort of anti-rock doc, because as soon as he would start a number, there would be cutaways to weird people on the street of Scotland and crazy people holding signs, many of which appear in my film. It is appointed unto man once to die is something that's in Eat the Document that we put in the Billy story. But and then it'll just cut off one of the songs. Just when you're like really ready to hear your rock idol, perform it, he just cuts it off. I love Eat the Document. Ronaldo and Clara. What do you think of Ronaldo and Clara?
Well, but in a word, I thought it was kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
But, I haven't seen it since 1978, but I'm not really anxious to revisit it. But
So you didn't have to go back to it, but I did.
You did, okay. So, but it's interesting that Eat the Document seems that it's quite crucial to the No Direction Home, the Scorsese.
Yeah.
Film, but it gets naturalized there because it's used there, if I'm remembering correctly, really as concert footage, and not in this
exactly
this sort of subjective montage that Dylan was working on.
I think my film is much more truer to its spirit than No Direction Home, but that wasn't its project, obviously.
Yeah.
No, I love that movie. I watch it over. I watched it over and over again. Every time I'd see it, there'd be some whole thing that I had forgotten was in it. It's packed to the gills. It's actually pretty much made by Jeff Rosen. I mean, Scorsese came in and finished the film, but Jeff had been working on it for 10 years.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, at what point did you become aware that there was this other movie in the works?
Yeah, right away. Jeff showed me his long cut of No Direction, or what would be No Direction Home, when we first met up, and it was astounding to see some stuff that had never been released before that now we all have access to. No, it wasn't a surprise, and it never felt like a competing project by any means. There's just such an interest, there's been such a resurgent interest in Dylan's work that's only been fueled by the quality of his recordings that he put out and the publication of Chronicles.
By he, you mean Dylan or Jeff Rosen?
No, but Dylan. I mean, there's been such, valid and understandable interest in Dylan that Scorsese's documentary could satisfy and leave plenty of room for my film to interest people later. So I never felt like,
And also, I would put a plug in for the Murray Lerner film, The Other Side of the Mirror, which I think is going to be showing here later, which is footage of Dylan at 3 successive Newport folk festivals, and it is a concert. I mean, it's the most extensive concert documentary of his, but it also is a drama. It's a 3-act drama. It's quite something.
And it proves the conceit of my film better than any, really, because it's just watching him change in front of you in unedited documentary footage, and watching the relationship that he had with his following change too, because the reactions, the audience, the sense of the audience, and the relationship that he had with them is palpable in all 3 sections.
Yeah. It seems to me that in many respects, Dylan is what you would call a hero of adolescence, in the same way that Rimbaud is. I mean, that there's something, particularly in his mid-'60s albums, that really speaks very strongly. And I can't be objective about it for historical reasons, since I actually was an adolescent at that period. So it had a tremendous effect on me, more than anything else that he ever did. But I'm curious, because it seems to me that if I'm guessing correctly, you were probably in high school in the late '70s or early '80s, which is kind of the heyday, or just past the heyday of punk rock, which was quite a compelling thing in its own right, and that Dylan was, I think, in his gospel phase then, which, from my perspective, would have been kind of the nadir of his career. So how did you get involved in Dylan, and when?
Dylan, I was a little older. It was high school. I was in, by the time, it was '79 when I graduated from high school in Los Angeles, and it was really my high school years, starting probably in 9th grade, that I fell in love with Dylan's music, and it was the '60s period. It wasn't
the gospel.
No, obviously not initially. It was initially Blonde on Blonde and Bringing It All Back Home and Blood on the Tracks. But I remember the releases. I vaguely remember the release of Desire, and then I fully remember Street Legal, and then Slow Train Coming, the first Christian record, the first gospel collection of gospel recordings. And that was the time I saw him. That was the first time I saw him, was on that tour. So it was a strange window to encounter him in first, but that's a fantastic record and really beautiful, solid recordings. And that's an example of all the songs on Slow Train Coming. I probably prefer to the song Pressing On that we chose to use as the penultimate song for Christian Bale's character. But it was, again, a choice of what was best serving the narrative, what really was needed for the film at that point in its progress. And I also found it was exciting to find discoveries and to reinterpret them with new bands that would give them an extra sense of life and kind of keep reinventing and keeping this amazing body of work alive.
Well, you also did something that I'm not. I mean, certainly I had never thought of this. I don't know whether it was logical for people to make a connection between the Christian Dylan of the early '80s and the finger pointing Dylan of the early '60s, but by casting Christian Bale in both roles, and this movie creates a theory around that aspect, which
I think
is very persuasive.
I think we all struggle with understanding, many of us who identify much more easily with his political associations in the protest years than we do with the political implications of his fundamentalist Christianity that he fell into. It wasn't just some hippie Christianity. It was Pentecostal, evangelical Christianity, and it was fire and brimstone time. And he was conducting many sermons before these concert performances in the late 70s and early 80s. And that's when many of his fan base, which was most identified with leftist politics, of course, were horrified and bewildered. And I really found that was the thing that needed explanation more than the first half. And I felt that I was just so interested in how these were two periods of Dylan's life that shared more similarities than I think we were able to see initially, and that they were both driven by moral persuasion and a sense of having the answer, and a curious and uncustomary lack of humor in both cases, something that's been evident in Dylan's work from the beginning of his very first record till today. And in these two times, a lot of that went away, and there was a sense of strident righteousness in both cases, and also rare for him, a sense of him having the definitive answer. And they were completely opposite answers, but they were equally strident and solid, and they provoked incredibly passionate work, music, and performances. And it helped me just personally to understand the Christian period better by making that link, I guess.
Although I'm not sure that he didn't have a sense of humor in the earlier period. I mean,
you're right, in the talking blues stuff,
And you have that couple. Is that supposed to be Harold Leventhal? The producers saying that what's so great about him, he can give you the pathos thing, he can do the Chaplin thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. The Talking Blues obviously had a sense of humor, but I almost associate that more with his Woody Guthrie, Dust Bowl kind of persona. Yeah. And when he got topical, I mean, they're exquisite recordings, but there was I think it was the climate, the sense of being indoctrinated to a following that was very strong and very decisive in both cases, and definitely serious.
Yeah, and also possibly submerging himself in something that seemed larger than he was, which for somebody who comes across, and not least in this movie, is such an isolated individual that,
were events. Yeah. And things that he couldn't persist in, like maybe everything else. Yeah. But with particularly strong ramifications of his both entering these worlds and then deserting them.
People who are cineasts think of this on that they're not only is a film about Bob Dylan and the character Bob Dylan, but also a celebration of movies from that period, and most specifically Jean-Luc Godard, and who is referenced throughout. But I think that this again was an example of doing something that Dylan wanted for himself and couldn't do. I mean, to appear in a new wave movie
to be the star of his own new wave movie.
Yeah. I mean, not to bring back Ronaldo and Clara again, but I was, there's an interesting interview with Sam Shepard, who had been sort of imported into this project, to write, like a screenplay about what, Dylan told him he should look at Children of Paradise, because it was the only movie that stopped time, and shoot the piano player. And then Sam Shepard saying, "Oh, is that, you want something like that?" And Dylan said, didn't really say anything, but...
he was also really into Fassbinder during that time. I remember those quotes, right?
Well, that's what Scorsese. So that's what specifically Beware of a Holy Whore, a movie about making
movies, a totally self-reflexive film.
Yeah. But how much were you thinking about these the movies that Dylan might have seen or probably liked or being produced at that time?
I sort of took it as an assumption, and maybe you did the same, Jim, in your book, The Dream Life, that there was something, and I don't know if you would say, I'm curious what you'd say to this, if there was something, well, maybe I do know what you might say. But that there was something unique about the 60s in that its cinema and its politics, its events, had a kind of, mirroring aspect. That there was something cinematic about the political events that were happening, and something extremely personal and interactive about the cinema and the popular culture that was being made. And I think for me, I guess I would just see it as that there was. I love the book by the Conquest of Cool by Thomas Frank.
Yeah.
Because it's a book that it's a book about basically the 60s, but seen through an analysis of the advertising culture of the 60s. But it deflates this idea that radicality came from the margins, that a sense of experimentation came from a counterculture, and then mainstream America absorbed it and copied it. This basically starts with the premise that a kind of repudiation of the 50s was happening at every level of society as early as 1960, and talks about those amazing Volkswagen ads that appeared first in Life magazines in 1960, where an entirely different assumption about the intelligence of the consumer was entering the advertising world. And all of a sudden they were like, don't talk down to the everyday reader, but realize that they're 3 steps ahead of you. And you can be witty and ironic with them, and you can be minimalist and have these empty white pages with a tiny Volkswagen in the middle of the page and a catchphrase that says, ugly, isn't it? For the first time, this whole idea of treating the consumer as someone smart and with it entered mainstream America. Now this, I was just so interested in this, and in my visual notebooks for this film, I have all these pictures of the Volkswagen ads next to images of Bob Dylan shot against white seamlesses 5 years later with his crazy hair as the silhouette against the white seamless. Ugly, isn't it? That there was something that still looked incredibly modern, and it still does today, and with a sense of, something happened in the 60s that still looks more modern than anything that's happened since. And we copy it. We copy that simple, minimalist graphic and that sense of, anyway, I'm completely going
No,
off course.
I'm trying to see if I agree with. I think that actually the thing that changed people's perception, both in the let's say at the margins and also in the center, by which we would mean these advertising agencies, was pop art, is what caused that, introduced that ironic appreciation of the what the vernacular landscape, and the fact that, we're all being manipulated, so let's make the manipulation out front and fun. Even introducing the idea of fun.
Yeah. But even saying that suggests that everybody was interested in art. That in other words, that the collapse of high and low was something that was affecting the fine art world and the business world and the counterculture world.
Well, yeah, because that was the thing with pop art. How could you not get it? You could hate Andy Warhol's silk screens, or his Brillo boxes, but it's not like you wouldn't understand. You couldn't look at it and say, like a Rothko, and go, what's this?
Yeah.
You knew what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just think there was this sense of the new that definitely coincided with the Kennedy administration, and with a whole young generation of people who decided for the first time to not be intimidated by the idea of a Cold War that should stop you from speaking out and stop you from having a sense of humor and stop you from living your life, basically, and being young and being, curious and assuming that other people felt the same way. Not assuming the contrary, for the first time, not assuming there was this stupid mainstream, but assuming that the mainstream might be smart and cool like you.
Well, that was Allen Ginsberg's point. I'm assuming that's an invented exchange, or was somebody there taking notes when they spoke?
At the, in the
Ginsberg
car?
well, when he talks to him about bringing art to
From the jukebox. It's a quote from Ginsberg.
Really?
Yeah. People were literally asking Ginsberg about had Dylan sold out and what did it mean before. Well, no, they'd probably met by then. I forget exactly when.
Well,
he's on
Bringing it
back on 65.
Yeah.
It might have been before. It was around that time,
Yeah.
And they did visit a big, I think when they went to Kerouac's grave in Jersey, is it?
It's in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, maybe.
Lowell, Massachusetts.
Lowell,
yeah,
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But is there a huge crucifix? I think they visited some huge crucifix and had a dialogue with Jesus together at that point as well.
Yes.
There's nothing original in the film.
Well, but this actually brings something. I remember we had a conversation when Far From Heaven came out. Your most normal film, I guess. And you said to me, that it was a movie that I could take my I could take my grandmother to. It would have been difficult, but but I got your point. But watching this, and even watching it with an audience, which I can tell you was really with the movie throughout. I wonder, that there's it's so rich in detail and reference. How it plays outside the cognition. I mean, this is in a way a test case for what you were describing in terms of this new attitude in the 60s, that something could be popular and difficult at the same time.
I know. I mean, that's what's so inspiring about that period, and that I guess I just felt like what was amazing about Dylan is that he could, and so many people at this time, is that they could decide to completely, burden a popular form or a disposable form like the popular song with whatever you wanted: poetry, politics, ambiguity, vagueness, humor, absurdity, epic ambitions, and then minimalist, nods to the old weird America, and that people would follow you wherever you went with it, that the mainstream would just go where you went, no matter how crazy and unprecedented. And that's what happened with him. That just doesn't happen very often. And I just had to keep honoring those experiments. It was my little kind of whipping to myself, just like, don't dumb it down. Don't just make it so everybody can just eat it up and make it stupid. Just respect the genuine weirdness of Dylan, and if people don't dig it, it's okay. I can't make the 2008 into 1966. That isn't my job. Mm-hmm. My job is to honor this artist and his uniqueness and his range of experimentation that just so happened coincided with an audience and a populace hungry to have their minds blown, or at least changed, or at least, diverted.
I mean, this is something you don't have to answer this if you don't want, because I assume this is different for everyone who creates or writes. But did you have a specific an ideal spectator in mind? I mean, even if it was you, was it Dylan? I mean, was there some internal viewer?
It's a good question. I don't really think of a type of person. I just think of the person watching it. I don't really brand them or put them into a group. I just think of And I guess that's me. I guess that's me watching it. But I also don't presume everyone will know what I know. I mean, the thing that I knew is I was going to jam it, as you say, with all these references and all this stuff that no one could possibly get, you know? But every movie is full of stuff. And sometimes it's stuff you really want to learn more about, and sometimes it's stuff you really could care less about, and you feel like you've seen a million times before. I always remember, you know, it's like when you're a kid and you're really moved by something or you're really affected by something, you can never totally grasp it. It's always stuff that's a little bit beyond you, that has more, you know, traveling in there, that keeps you going, keeps you interested. And I've never understood all the words in a Bob Dylan song. In some of my favorite of his songs, his mostly
Literally or figuratively?
Well, like, you know, depends on the record, I guess. But really, almost any of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of any that just, it's just not what it's about. Mm-hmm. It's not about mastering.
Yeah, but of course, this you know, flies in the face of certain, let's say the conventional wisdom of the media world as we're experiencing it now, which is that people don't want to be necessarily in the presence of something that they don't completely understand, or they have to work to understand, or they know that they're not going to ever necessarily understand. They want things supposedly that are easily digestible and don't complicate. You know, they're thinking about, you know, where their paycheck is coming from, or whatever.
Sure.
I mean,
well, I felt like Dylan's experimentations were always harnessed by specific, very basic traditions of music, blues traditions and country traditions and all of that he just added his stuff onto and mixed up. He didn't change musical form. He used traditions. And then similarly, I'm referring, every story is a story you've sort of seen before. There's generic. And to me, as I got further into Dylan, I realized that all of these sort of people and places he occupied were these sort of American tropes that are ingrained in our culture. And so they have a familiarity that's basic and that's constantly recycled and revised, whether it's, you know, the story of the famous person struggling with their personal life against their fame, or the rebel teenage, you know, person who's questioning society, or a person who finds faith, or a person who is, you know, looking for betterment of other people and struggling politically to find solutions. The ambitious child who wants to break into the world and find his footing. These aren't strange or obscure stories in and of themselves, you know, and each of the tropes come with their own history and traditions, and they're very American, especially in their combination and in their weird and fascinating contradictions to each other, the way they kind of unwrite each other, you know. But the thing about Dylan, which is so funny, and I think it's very American, is that each of the places that he occupied, and this is different from the way, for instance, the Bowie-esque character in my film Velvet Goldmine changes costumes and identities.
I was going to ask you about that. Okay.
With a kind of, you know, English self-consciousness and sense of wit and irony about it. Instead, the American version of this multiple identity is sort of intensely innocent every time, like with a sense of almost amnesia about wherever he was before. This kind of persistent thing that they just discovered it fresh today. And it's incredibly frustrating. It's valid for all those people to be angry at Dylan when he chucked folk music and said, I didn't care about that stuff at all. Because he just produced all of these records and all these songs and put all this work into it. And then he's saying, oh, I never even cared about that stuff, you know. Of course you want to, like, rattle him, you know. But I think that there's something very American about that.
Well, I think I mean, that's a very interesting what you said about David Bowie, or the David Bowie, and also the David Bowie character, more or less.
Right.
Velvet Goldmine. It reminds me of the sort of standard difference between American acting and British acting, between Brando and Laurence Olivier.
Oh, yeah, right.
Like British actors, they vanish into the role, they accept the role, they play the role, they vanish into the role. But the Brando has to find the role in himself.
Right. Yeah. Living inside, and it's even a weird deviation from Stanislavski. It's like something even more. Self-absorbed and kind of, like completely,
Well, it's actually a creative misunderstanding of Stanislavski. It's an interesting story how that happened. But
that it was.
Well, the group theater sent emissaries to the Soviet Union to speak, or maybe Stanislavski was in Switzerland there to speak with him, and they're
when
in the 30s.
In the 30s.
It was Stella Adler.
Oh, yeah.
Because she probably understood some Russian, but she didn't understand enough.
Right.
So they just came back with their own, take on it.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's how things happen in this world, through creative misunderstanding.
Yeah, exactly. Misinterpretation.
Okay, so I had you answered that one so well. I don't have to. That was a question that had been emailed to me after we did the press conference
about like Velvet Goldmine
yes.
versus this.
Do you want to hear?
Yeah.
Okay. The way the Dylan folkies in the film react to his betrayal of the Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger acoustic tradition reminded me of how you, or he, meaning you, Todd, in Velvet Goldmine characterized David Bowie's betrayal of glam and the spirit of Oscar Wilde. He's an opportunistic hollow man who doesn't care what his Ziggy Stardust image meant to people, adolescent gays and bisexuals whom the movement liberated. The Bowie figure is so unsympathetic that in the end he's even revealed to have had plastic surgery and allied himself with an Orwellian fascist culture. So why does Bowie's shifting persona represent the ultimate sellout in Dylan, the mark of a pure spirit?
But it's a good question, though. It's well pointed.
But I think
sharp.
I know. I think you have the American revolutionary on one hand, and the colonial oppressor on the other. Well. Let me just wind up by asking you, now that you've finished this, something which was in the works for how many years?
So many.
Yeah, I mean, through something that you began, had to put down, return to, and so on, which is very difficult. And after having already addressed a number of popular culture texts, Karen Carpenter, not just David Bowie, but glam rock in its largest sense, Douglas Sirk, the director. What are you thinking about now?
Rest. I don't have. It's funny. I've come to the end of a big cycle. When I first when this project first came to me, it was in a state of. It kind of took me by storm. A kind of return to Dylan, because I first was exposed to him in high school and then really didn't listen to him for about 20 years. Listened to a lot of different kinds of music and found myself at a point at the end of my 30s and at the end of what would become the end of my years in New York, planning to get back. I was trying to take a little break after Velvet Goldmine and go to and do my melodrama. I was like, almost begrudgingly, I was sort of like, I love working with Juliana and Safe, so let's do a Sirkian thing together. It will be good, and it'll be good to get back to work. But I wasn't totally just, I wasn't impassioned. And sort of on the side, it always sort of happens when you're not looking, that this desire to hear Dylan's music sort of took me over, and it was at this time that I was leaving New York to visit Portland, Oregon, to write Far From Heaven, get away from the city. But all I wanted to do was listen to Dylan, and I was so obsessed. I became obsessed, and it's such a delicious thing to be, especially when you get older, and especially when you're looking for change in your own life. And there's no better person to turn to than Dylan. And ultimately, this project became about change as a radical, sustaining kind of creative strategy that I saw marking him, defining him. And it ended up changing me, changing my place. I ended up settling in Portland and writing Far From Heaven right when I got there, but conceiving of this film. And then I knew, like, God, I had this Dylan. And then by the end of that year, we had gotten rights from Jeff Rosen. So I looked ahead and said, my God, I'm going to be doing the Far From Heaven thing and the Dylan thing. And I knew that was like embarking on a big cycle ahead. I didn't know it would take quite this long. You never know, do you? But I've come to the end of it. It's an interesting time because I'm emptied out, you know? There's a Freud, I want to do a film about Freud eventually.
Okay.
But I need a little time, man. I need a little rest.
Okay, well, this turned out magnificently, so we'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.